Hello, if you're a South African gaming streamer who's taking part in this weekend's event, or if you're a chess player who's just completely new to chess, or you're just coming back after some time away and you're dusting off the rust, then this video is for you. What I'm going to be doing is giving you a couple of tips, not going super in-depth or complicated, but a couple of tips that can help you improve your chess game a little bit and give you a bit more confidence. I'm going to try and do it quite quickly, so let's just jump in and not waste any further time. The first tip involves what to do at the start of a chess game. Basically, what you should start off by doing is trying to control these central squares that I'm highlighting here. If you're a gamer, you can kind of think of this like the high ground. It's not going to win you the game outright, but it will possibly give you an advantage that could help you win the game further down the line. What it means to take control of the center is to either try and put pawns here if it is safe, or just to move all of your pieces so that they're pointing inwards and they're busy attacking these central squares. In line with this, you also want to take all of your forces out to battle, so you want to use your knights and your bishops and get them out in order to attack. And then the final thing you should try and do in the opening is just get your king to safety by castling, so that it's safe, so that when you are attacking, you don't have to worry about your king's safety. So that's 3 easy things to do at the start of the game: control the center, bring out your knights and bishops, and get your king to safety. The next tip is just to keep things simple. I like to refer to this as caveman chess. Let's say that your opponent captures your knight with their bishop. Don't start overcomplicating it and think, okay, should I take over here? Should I take over here? Should I just, what should I do? Keep it simple. You take my piece, I take your piece. This is especially important when you are a beginner player where you're going to take a lot of time to narrow down your move options in general. You want to try and move a little bit quicker, speed up things, and spend time on things that are actually complicated, not things like, they take my piece, what should I do? Just take back immediately. A similar thing to if you're at the start of the game, you're trying to decide, should I bring out my knight? Should I bring out my bishop? Don't go and wait for 5 minutes trying to contemplate, like, should I go here first? Should I go here first? Just pick one and do it. There probably isn't that much difference between the moves in the first place. The third tip is to know the basics. Know the value of the pieces so that you know if you should give up your rook for a knight, if that is a good idea or if it isn't. Most of the time, just a hint, it is not. You also need to know basic things like how to checkmate with a queen, such as this, and also how to checkmate with 2 rooks. If you know these 2 things, you should then be able to convert most games where you end up being up material. If you're not entirely sure how to do this, the best way is first of all learn the method and then to practice. And I'll link in the description below a place where you can go and learn how to do it and practice against a computer. The 4th tip is for what you should be doing when you're up material. If you have followed tip number 3, you know how to checkmate with the queen. So if you find yourself a queen up, as in this position, what you should try and do is do equal trades in order to simplify the position to get to a situation where you just have a queen and you can beat them quite easily. Pieces though, in general, it's pieces, not pawns, so bishops and knights and rooks, you're not necessarily wanting to trade pawns, but over here, for example, you're a queen up if you just do a quick count of the material, and you see you can take their knight with your knight. Sure, they can take you back, and if they take back with the bishop, you should then trade again, because once again, you're taking a knight, getting a knight, taking a bishop, getting a bishop, and after those 2 trades, black has fewer pieces, you're still left with your extra queen, and you should be able to win this game. Just as a word of caution though, is if you do trade off all of the pieces, and maybe you trade off all of the pawns, or your opponent's pawns just get stuck, and they're only left with your king, make sure that your opponent's king always has a place to move, or else make sure that you're always putting your opponent's king in check. In chess, stalemate is when your opponent just runs out of moves and has absolutely no moves to make, and this is something that happens very frequently at a beginner level because you're not entirely sure how to do the checkmate, you're just chasing the king, and you end up leaving it with no squares to go to. So make sure you always leave them a space to go to, or if you keep on checking them, you might accidentally stumble into a checkmate, and then you'll definitely get the full point instead of only half a point. The next tip is for what you should do towards the end of the game. Once you've traded off queens, maybe you traded off some bishops, some knights, and in an extreme case you're left with a situation like this where there are only kings and pawns left on the board, your king shouldn't hide away from all of the action and just be a casual observer. Endgames are where it is the king's time to shine, and you want to bring your king into the game in order to attack your opponent's pawns, or possibly pieces as well, but mainly pawns, and you also need your king sometimes to shepherd your pawns to the other side of the board. So here, for example, we can use our king as an attacking piece. We're busy going all the way to the root of the pawn chain, which is basically pawns just sitting together and being protected by the other pawns. Always attack it at the back. And we munch some pawns. And then the next important thing to remember at the end of the game is you can't necessarily checkmate your opponent's king with just pawns. So you want to take your pawns and you want to try and get a queen with that. And now we know how to checkmate because we followed tip number 3, and you can carry on and just win your game. The next couple of tips are just kind of general quickfire tips that I'm just going to throw out there, some things that you can try and keep in mind and remember to play in your games as well. The first one is, once you've got your king to safety through castling, it's often a good idea to play a move like h3 or g3, or if you're black, you're going to play h6 or g6. Just one of them, not both of them, and only moving the pawn one square forward. And the reason for this, it's just to give your king a little bit of breathing space so that if you ever get attacked, you have somewhere to go and hide. So that's quite a nice thing to do in your games. Another bit of advice that you might have heard before is don't move your f pawn, or never play f6, never play f3. So don't move this pawn here or here, and don't move this pawn here or here. As a beginner, that's a good little bit of advice to remember, even if you don't understand why it is the case. Just don't do it and you won't get into too many problems. Another thing to remember is just these two squares, so f7 and f2, are two of the weakest points on a chessboard. If you see that your opponent starts out and they move their queen out really, really early, they pretty much have one plan with that. And that plan is to do something like this. Attack your f7 pawn with the queen and to attack it with the bishop. And because if you ignore that, if you just solidify your center or something like that, they're going to get a very, very speedy checkmate, which is absolutely brutal, and you don't want this to happen to you. So just remember that that square is always pretty weak until you've got your king to safety and castled. So take a little bit of extra time if you need it in the opening, if your opponent does bring their queen out quickly, to make sure that this square is defended. Or sometimes it also gets attacked by a knight. So if a knight goes here and a bishop goes here, this is why it's important to castle early, because once you've castled, your rook will be defending this pawn. Another thing you might want to do before you jump into tournament games or before you jump into games is just change your settings a little bit. If you're still learning how the pieces move and you're not entirely sure and you like to see when you click on a piece exactly which squares it can move to, if you just go to your settings by clicking on the wheel icon in the top right corner of the board and then go down to board settings, you can go show legal moves and just turn that on. And then every time you click on a square, it'll show you which squares your piece can move to. Another thing that you might want to do, although you have to be really careful with this setting, is when you're playing online chess, you're allowed to do something called premoves. Premoves is basically locking in your move before your opponent even makes their move. So once they make your move immediately gets played and you don't lose too much time on your clock. This is dangerous because you can sometimes make premoves that are absolutely terrible if you miscalculate what your opponent is going to do or mispredict what they were going to do. So I would advise in general, as a lower rated or a beginner player, rather just don't use premoves at all. Where premoves can be helpful though, is if either you're playing a game where you have no time added to your clock, and at the end of the game, you're almost out of time, so you need to move really, really fast. You can't be spending a couple of seconds on every move. Then it's useful to have premoves enabled. Or it can also be useful if you're trying to gain time. So let's say you have increment in the tournament this weekend, it's 10 minutes plus a 2-second increment per move. So then maybe you want to play a couple of moves really fast in order to get some extra time to think. Then you can have premoves enabled, and this is where you change it. If you go to the settings, play, and then find the live tab and just turn on enable premoves. But as I say, be very careful with this, and also make sure that you have time to practice before the tournament if you are going to try use premoves. You'll see that a premove is about to happen if you see the square highlighted in red, and it looks as though like a piece is maybe taking another piece, and it's still your opponent's turn. To cancel a premove, just right click. To cancel a premove, just right click anywhere on the board and it will cancel it. Something you just have to also be careful about if you are busy clicking on pieces to see which squares they can move to, make sure that you don't drop it on a square accidentally, because if you do that, you can't take your move back and you're maybe going to play a really terrible move. In chess, we call this a mouselip, and a way to just cancel the selection of a piece is either you click on a square where they can't legally go to, or what you can do is just right click somewhere on the board to cancel that. So watch out for those pitfalls. It's something you've got to get used to, and you get used to through playing online chess. There are probably a million other tips and advice on how to improve in chess. If you have a little bit of extra time, I'd advise that you go and have a look at the Chess Bar Building Habits series, where they have a lot of tips for people of different rating ranges. And you can also watch the videos where the move process is talked through, the habits and the rules are explained, and you can really get some very good advice over there. I'll link that series in the description below. That's all the rules that I will be bombarding you with today. Hopefully it wasn't too complicated. But before we end off, I'll leave you with one more bonus tip or piece of advice. I would say this is probably the most important thing, and that is to just have fun and to remember that no one plays a perfect game of chess, not even the top grandmasters in the world. If you make a mistake in the game, don't just rage quit chess, don't go absolutely tilted for the rest of the game, just take a deep breath, carry on with the game and see if you can improve the position. Your opponent's not a machine, so there is always a chance of a comeback, and even if you don't manage to win the game, losing is part of life, it's good life lessons, just make sure that you're enjoying the game of chess. Good luck with your chess, and I hope you have found this video helpful. If you would like to see some more videos where I will go more in depth and explain the thought process behind moves, help you understand chess a little bit better, and teach you a couple of other concepts that we didn't have time for in this video, then make sure to subscribe to the channel to get notified of future content. Good luck with the tournament this weekend if you're playing, and I hope that you will have a great time and really enjoy your chess.